This presentation is one that you and I, Adele, delivered as part of the Good Practice Conference in January, and demonstrating really clearly how skilled and efficient I am with technology. The first 10 minutes of the recording ended up corrupted. So we've come together again to re-record those first 10 minutes so that people can watch the presentation as a whole rather than jump in halfway through. So it's going to be a bit strange because we're just talking to one another now, and then all of a sudden it's going to change to us delivering live. So if we have a costume change about 10 minutes through, then that's why. But for the purposes of the people who will be watching this on the website, would you introduce yourself, Adele, and then fire in?
Okay, so so the things that you're going to see, I'll just give a quick introduction for myself, and then the way we're going to talk about this is we're going to talk about top 5 tips. I've tried to pull everything together into 5 key things that we can cover, and Tia is going to interrupt me every so often with case studies and case information, and then at the end there'll be questions. So just a very quick intro for me. I am most importantly the parent of Connor, who is 25 years old. He loves bacon and marbles and annoying his mother. And he has autism, a severe learning disability, and epilepsy as well. When he was, just before his 3rd birthday, we ran a home-based intensive ABA, Applied Behaviour Analysis program. And we did that for 4 years before he went to a specialist school. In terms of myself, I've had training in the UCLA model of ABA. I have a degree in health and social care, and I'm also a skip instructor. I've done various things in my career, but that includes being a manager of an independent specialist college, and I've been a registered manager, and I'm currently a quality and compliance officer at SeeAbility. So that's me. So I'm going to go into a countdown of top 5 tips. So starting at number 5, a very, very obvious one, communicate plainly. I think we all know about the importance of avoiding jargon. I think we all use jargon. There's so much of it, particularly in the PBS world. And we do love an acronym, but it is really important that we try and avoid it if we can. We explain any acronyms that we use, and we try and keep our conversation, our communication simple and straightforward. And that also goes towards paperwork and data collection. Again, we love to collect a bit of data. We love to collect some stats and things like that, and we can end up with heaps and heaps of paperwork. Certainly when Connor, my son Connor, was doing his home program, we had rackfuls of A4 lever arch folders with paper in them, and I certainly did consider a ceremonial burning at the end of the 4 years, because we could have filled a whole room with the amount of paperwork, because I just didn't know what to do with all the data at the end.
What did
So
you end up with it? Did you shred it?
I wasn't kidding about the ceremonial bonfire. It went out in stages, because I was always frightened of, that one day, because this was an ongoing research program and is carrying on to this day, that somebody at some point would ask me for some bit of information or data, and then finally I just got to the point that nobody's going to ask me for the number of discrete trials we did on independent toy play in 1996. So gradually things either got shredded or burnt. So yes,
I'm deviating. This is going to throw you off because I'm deviating from how we did this live.
That's okay. Go ahead.
When you had like kind of a typical early intervention style program in your home, so you had, what that involves, if anybody's watching that doesn't really know, is that you have tutors turn up to your house every day for several hours a day, well, almost every day, working one-on-one or two-on-one or one-on-one with your son.
One-on-one, yeah.
In your home, like in your space. What do you have a memory of it being like there was one particular skill they taught that really changed things for us in the home, or was it just a cumulative series of
That's an interesting question. For my son, the way he learned, and this was perhaps not typical, was that he was a very slow and steady learner. We never had any massive peaks or troughs in learning, or he didn't really kind of speed up or slow down. In some ways, that was quite nice,
Mhm.
because I know from other families, other parents that I've talked to over the years, they often saw really, really quick sort of spurts of gaining of skills and knowledge, or communication suddenly really, really improved, and they had a big spike. But then they'd also have these awful troughs where there'd be regression, or there'd be no learning, no progress for a while, and it could be really frustrating. So for my son, it was pretty much slow and steady, but there are lots of moments that I remember uh, sort of very, very clearly. I remember the way the program starts is that we did a 5-day workshop, which was all the tutors. So I think at that time there were 5 tutors, including the senior tutor and the main clinician. And it was the first introduction to teaching everybody what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And it was also Connor's first exposure to ABA, to PBS. And so he, bless him, you can imagine, little, not even 3-year-old toddler, um, having his first sort of first things taught to him. And of course they are things like come here, come here, sit down. um, and so seeing him do those things even right at the start in the workshops the first time, and he picked up food reinforcers really quickly, totally got it.
Yeah.
So he learned sort of the basics quite quickly, and that really stands out as a memory. But then there were other things. The first time he did a verbal repetition was very memorable for all sorts of reasons. We were terribly excited because he copied someone and made a p sound, and he had never ever done a verbal imitation before. So that was really, really exciting. So yeah, there were sort of little moments throughout, but not a sort of one overwhelming big thing. It was just lots of little things that turned out to be quite key. And there were other things that that happened where we were quite excited about it, but actually it turned out to be, in the long run, not a big deal really. We just thought it was at the time.
Yeah.
um, yeah, that can be the challenge as well, is that hindsight, wonderful thing, hindsight, but at the time you don't know where your child's going to be in 10 years time. You don't know what their capacity to learn is.
Mhm.
You don't know um, what the priorities are necessarily in teaching, because you don't know what's going to be the most important thing for them until later. So
And sometimes
it's
it's so hard to see that future, isn't it? To like even be able to imagine it. And I guess that there's a couple of families I'm working with right now who are trusting me. And I guess that's one of the things you talk about, isn't it? It's like, don't abuse that trust. You'll talk about that later.
mm,
But um, I can tell they don't really believe me that it's possible for things to get better yet. And was that ever the case for you? Have you ever had moments where you thought, this is just, I just can't envisage much improvement in this particular area?
yeah, it's really difficult. And it's also getting a balance, particularly when you're a professional working with a family. It's very difficult to get that balance right between not giving false hope, and offering realistic expectation, which is very hard to do when you can't see 10 years into the future. Nobody can. People surprise you. You may have the child who's non-verbal, non-responsive to any kind of direction at all, who 10 years down the road is completely verbal, and has a very good level of understanding and so on. But they might not. And so dealing with that huge spectrum of what might be is very difficult. And I think certainly when Connor was younger, I tried to focus on the now and the immediate future rather than long term, because it was just too difficult. I think there was a point, and it was probably, I think probably around 8, or when he was about 8 or 9, when I got a sense of where he might be later on, and that he wasn't going to be going off to university and married and having children of his own and that kind of stuff. And that was a kind of gradual, you know conclusion that I came to. I sort of had a sense of where he was going to be, and that just got reinforced over the following couple of years. Some parents I've worked with never reach that understanding, and they continue to have aspirations that unfortunately are unrealistic. And I think, you know, it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking, because it just makes everybody unhappy. You know, it's not helpful, but I so understand it, you know, what you hope for your children. And
Yeah.
it's a frustrating, and as you as a parent will know that there's sort of a natural path that, you know, whether you consciously think about it or not, when you fall pregnant, when you have a child, there's just in the back of your mind what you kind of, what the expectation will be, you know, whether it's what pregnancy will be like, what childbirth will be like, what raising your child will be like. There's this kind of loose pattern of what's likely to happen. And that's all fine. And you never think about it until something takes you off that path. So whether it's a, you know, pregnancy that didn't work out the way you thought, or childbirth that, you know, ended in cesarean instead of a natural childbirth, or, you know, your child having a disability, whatever it is, you don't think about this particular path that's ingrained until you deviate from it. And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, that's not how I thought things were going to be. And it's a very, very hard thing to come to terms with for anybody, even if it's a slight deviation off the path. It's hard, but when it's a major road turning, it's doubly difficult.
It really fits with this tip though, in terms of like how to communicate with parents. Like, how would you advise professionals to tackle those kinds of issues with parents? Is it just, you know, because you don't want to come in and be like, look, you know, your child has a learning disability, it's very unrealistic to expect, or, you know, you don't want to dash people's hopes, but equally you don't want to further any potential um, disappointment by giving them false expectations. And I think it would be disappointing if you went in, you know, there's a professional there who's got all these potential like letters after their name who are telling you they can make it better, or at least that they in theory can make it better. And I think it, you know, you probably engenders a lot of hope, and repeatedly dashed hopes must be just so, you'll reach a point where it's just so intolerable to bear.
You're absolutely right, and I think this is it's a really good question. I think that, well, first of all, I would never talk around what somebody can't do or what they might never do. I would never talk in those terms. If a parent starts doing that, I think that opens a door for you. So I mean, I certainly started talking after I'd reached this sort of, you know, feeling that my son was going to go in a certain direction. I think that made it easier then to have some of those tougher conversations. But even then, you have to be you have to be sensitive to how you do it. So I would talk more about, you know, the now, what we're doing now and what we're expecting to see in the immediate future. So, you know, within this short period of time coming up, I would keep the focus there rather than doing any kind of long-term planning or even talking about, it is very difficult, but even talking about long-term potential can be a bit fraught. So I would try and stay off that, other than if you're talking about it in a very loose term. So if you're talking generally about things like life skills or something like that, I think that's fine. You know, you can be talking about, you know, sort of somebody's looking after their own health and well-being or their own personal care, because you can talk about it in such a broad way that it doesn't sort of conjure up views of someone being completely independent, say.
Yeah.
So I think that's okay. But yeah, I would just try and keep everyone focused on what we're doing now and why we're doing it. And then, you know, let's see how this progresses. Let's see how these things develop.
And did you
And
like
keep,
that information, like when Connor was working on something, did you like it presented back to you visually, or, you know, did you feel like, yes, I know he's doing well because I'm here every day and I can see it, like, why are you showing me a graph? Like, what was your personal preference?
Um, for me, I think people get way too bogged down in graphs and charts and things. That's my
Oh, we
personal
love them.
opinion.
Don't we love them?
I know. And they, I'm not saying that they aren't essential.
Mm,
Um, taking data is absolutely key. Monitoring things absolutely vital. Graphs for your own purposes really, really important. And in terms of you understanding things and communicating amongst yourselves as professionals, absolutely fine. And you may be working with families who that's how they like a visual too. I have nothing against graphs, quite happy, do understand them. You can present information to me in that way, but what it can do is remove that personal element. I think when you're talking about somebody's child, and yet for me as a parent, and I love a statistic, I really do, but I don't care about them when it comes to my child. What I want with my child is I want to see him doing things that he couldn't do before. And I have that now. I mean, he's 25 now and he's in supported living. And what excites me more than anything else is, like, the other day, I got a text from his support worker saying, Connor ate a toasted cheese sandwich today with Marmite on the top. And I'm like, he has never eaten a toasted cheese sandwich with me ever. And
wow.
I know, it's just, to me, that is absolute. That made my day. I had a smile on my face. It was ear to ear. That's what I want. That's what's going to make my day. And that hasn't changed from when he was 3. So yeah, it was seeing him do things that he'd never done before. That's how I, could see his progress. Um, Sometimes you need to be reminded of it, particularly, sort of further down the line, with maybe an older child that you're working with, where parents are feeling a bit like we're not making any headway. I mean, I can remember with Connor, we worked on trying to get him to draw dot to dot for a year. And we were so creative with trying to get him to, because we wanted to teach him to write. And yeah, there's times when you just wanted to tear your hair out and just go, well, what is the point in carrying on with this? We're not getting anywhere. And sometimes I think being reminded of where you've come from is really useful. Look at what the progress we've made so far. But I still think that needs to be done in real terms. I think for most parents would say the same thing.
It
Um,
doesn't, it doesn't match the toasted cheese sandwich, though, does it?
well, but it's, I mean, even and those little things, and we can forget how big those little things are
There wasn't
sometimes.
any bacon in it.
Well, that next step, I think if it had, it probably would have been wolfed down even faster. But it's, yeah, it's just, that those things that for Connor, it's things he's never done before. It's exposure to new stuff, getting him to do things that I didn't have the time to teach him at home. Looking after his home and his, himself and things like that. The support workers now have the time to put those things into to place and to work on them with him. But yeah, I think as far as sort of how you present information, I think be very careful about, and it's not to say that people don't understand them. I mean, I come onto that in
Yeah.
this section about don't assume level of education or understanding, because it can be very easy to overestimate someone's uh, understanding of what you're presenting in terms of information, and nobody wants to be put in that position where they have to turn around to someone and go, sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. It's going to make them feel foolish. And the last point in here, be realistic about what parents want and need to know. It's the same principle. You might be extremely excited about a particular piece of research or the data that you're collecting on the person that you're working with or whatever, and that might be your big thing, but it's not necessarily the parents or the family members or the person themselves. You know for them, it's about, are we making progress? Are we getting a result, the desired result that we want in providing this support? So yeah, keep it simple. If a parent does show a desire to see all the data in that form, absolutely go for it. But
Yeah.
just be sure that they do, and they're not just saying, you know, being polite.
Totally, totally.
So,
Great.
so
Thank
yeah, communicate plainly. It's it is what it says.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you want to go ahead with your?
So yeah, I'll need to, because I'm pretty sure I talk about a couple of them in the second half, which is live. But just a couple of examples of how varied work in the family home can be, you know, and what PBS, and what do we mean when we say PBS in the family home? Like, what are we actually referring to? And under these circumstances, we're referring to implementing the PBS framework of the PBS model, which, you know, for example, as defined by Gore or Kincaid, you know, you can find these references on our website and things. And there's actually a little video about what is PBS on the website, so people can see that. But it's mostly associated with social care organizations, right? Or schools, very originally schools. And one of the challenges has been for people, and for me, because I do a lot of work in family homes, how do we adapt that? How do we adapt this framework that we know can be very successful to fit with a slightly different environment? So a couple of examples of how I've done that. One was with a young girl, 4.5, so really early, really young at the age of referral, who was referred due to some issues with transitioning, quite a typical behavior, you know, becoming stuck during transitions and unable to move any further forward. Food refusal, which is a common behavior, and, you know, very restricted diet. So we worked alongside a really wonderful speech and language therapist who's also a BCBA to address some of those issues. And physical aggression towards others. On the complete other end of the spectrum, I have worked with adults who still happen to be living at home, you know, in their family home. One young lady, because she's younger than me, referred for restricted fluid intake, inability to use public bathrooms, refusal to sleep in their own bed. You know, the variety of behaviors of concern that you are targeting is just as varied as it would be in social care settings, but the contextual fit requirements will be different.
Full stop.
Full stop. Yeah.
And those are the great examples.
All right. Oh, yes. So in practice, you were talking about communicating plainly. I deviated to completely off track because I think that's based on some of the feedback. What people really valued was your personal experience and hearing about that. So I've made an emphasis on it. So how do I do some of this in practice? Well, I don't write a BSP, at least not a long one. And it's a bugbear of mine, and I'm sure of yours, Adele, as a quality and compliance officer. You know, positive behavior support isn't paperwork. That's not what it is. And you certainly don't get to say you're doing it because you have a report titled behavior support plan in a folder somewhere, whether it be on the desktop or in the actual cupboard. So I don't do that because in my personal experience, the last thing families need is more paperwork, more reports. And they have loads of reports detailing the skills of their child, the medical health conditions of their child, the speech and language capabilities of their child. You know, they're used to receiving these. And one family in particular, the young 4.5-year-old, described it, and I can't remember, this isn't verbatim, but they basically said, we need people to stop telling us what needs to be done, and we need somebody to actually do it. And that kind of hit the nail a little bit on the head for me. So get active with your proactive strategies, I suppose, is, you know, and actively do them. Resist the temptation to get technical. I love it. I love the language. I love the science. It's so fantastic. You know, I love talking about behavioral contrast and matching law and differential reinforcement. And I love understanding these things. And it helps me make sense of the world around me. I am in the minority of people who love that. So don't do it, resist it. And if you really can't resist it, call up a fellow behavior analyst and get your teeth into the technical stuff, or wait till you have a supervision. And finally, start small and clear. Particularly if you're working with families in crisis, there's going to be a lot that feels like it needs addressing. And the family may not even be clear on what the priorities are for them. So that will take a bit of time to drill down. You know, if we could work on one thing right now, what would make your life easier? If we could make one thing right now, what would make your family context more enriched? You know, what are our options there? Set those small targets and focus on them. You know, do not deviate. until we all agree to as a group, because otherwise people just end up doing lots of things not terribly well. And that's quite disheartening for the people at home, in my experience.
Yeah, I think I mean I think I said this before that when this chart came up, it just sort of brought back all sorts of memories, because this summary rag sheet was exactly what I used with my team when I was a registered manager. Um, this format, because it's only one page, and I could actually do things like insist that my support workers read this every single morning when they came at the start of shift, for example, because you can read it every morning, and you're more likely to follow it. Something like this, one page, really, really clear what you should be doing at different times. So, you know, when all is well, you know, you've got your clear green strategies there. It's all simple language, you know, do things like, you know, back off when things start getting agitated, or, you know, crack jokes, or start singing, you know, all sorts of really simple things. You don't need complicated jargon. Um, uh, I don't disagree with your like of technical terminology, because it describes things that are so useful. You know, when you started talking about certain terms, it instantly brought things into my mind, and that's what those terms are for. So they have a purpose and they have a place. And you know, I certainly use terminology still that I learned, you know, 22 years ago when Connor was doing his home program. So things that I learned then, I still, you know, the terms I still use now, because I know what they mean and I understand them, and they have a realistic context for me. It's when things are getting blown at you left, right, and centre, or you sit in a meeting, in a multidisciplinary meeting, and you've no idea what the people around the table are talking about. You don't want to be in that position as a parent. You know, as a key person in the multidisciplinary team, you want to know what's going on. You want to know what people are saying about your child or your relative. So yeah, we should talk at the, I don't want to say the minimal level, because that suggests, you know, sort of less intelligence or education or understanding, but talk at a level that everyone understands and can contribute to.
I think it's reasonable to assume that unless you are a behavior analyst, you will not know what those words mean, or potentially clinical psych. You know, you will not know what those words mean. So I think it's an awful lot less to do with general levels of intelligence and just like probability.
Exposure. Yeah.
Probability of people knowing what, you know, if I was in a room with a mathematician, I would expect them not to talk to me about math stuff, you know, in a way that they would talk to other mathematicians. You know, we would expect that. And the same with, you know, GPs and doctors. There's a requirement on them. You know, they understand that, you know, there's all kinds of words, you know, analgesic. They use the word painkiller, like, because everybody knows what that means. So I don't think this is in any way reflective of judgments we make about people's capabilities, and much more an understanding that actually, unless you've got a master's or a postgrad or, you know, an undergrad in behavior analysis, the chances are fairly high you're not going to know what that word refers to. Not that you couldn't come to understand it, but
No.
that you in this moment.
Exactly. And, you know, people are already overwhelmed with what's going on with the situation itself. The last thing they need to be, you know, is further
Yeah,
confused or, you know, yeah, point
totally.
made. Okay, on to the next tip, number 4. So use available resources and environment. This covers a sort of multitude of different things, really, but the key thing is that if you're working with a family, try and involve the whole family and seek buy-in from everybody. So this is about communicating well with people. It's about getting people on board with what you're trying to do. One of my favorite sort of go-to examples with this of not achieving buy-in is I used to hear so many stories from families where they'd say it'd be one person in the family, and I'm going to pick on Granny because it was often Granny who wouldn't follow the rules of her beloved grandchild and didn't understand the importance of maintaining consistency in how something was being done, which of course, as we know, is a real key. The one I often heard was, and this was because so many of the children on the program that Connor was on, the research program that Connor was on, were all on various diets, so gluten-free diets, dairy-free, all sorts of things like that. And it would often be, poor granny who just wanted to give, grandchild a cookie or something like that, and was just setting things back hugely. So do seek buy-in, to get everybody on board, get everybody understanding what you're doing, what consistency is so important, why you're doing what you're hoping to achieve by it, and sometimes you need to use different ways of achieving that. What will work with one member of the family might not work with another. So, how you talk to granny about it might be quite different to how you talk to, say, a sibling of the child that you're working with. And this is where sort of identifying strengths and weaknesses within the family can be really useful. And probably weaknesses is not necessarily the right term here, but just sort of differences in the way that families coexist. So uh, extreme example here, we have two families. We have the Lycra family, who are out on their bikes all the time. They're exercising, they're out and about, they're never sat still. They go hiking every weekend, and it's all about fitness and activity for them. And then you've got Couch Potato family, who is all about absolutely avoiding getting out on the bike and doing things like playing on the PlayStation, using their iPads, watching movies, things like that. So if you take these two extremes, you're going to approach things very differently with those two families. So if you are introducing a new program, a new way of doing things with someone, you're going to pick something that's likely to work with the particular family that you're working with. And I know this sort of seems really kind of straightforward, but you'd be surprised, how many times somebody might be trying to push a family into supporting a particular program that is so outside of what that family is used to, that it's really difficult for them to do it. So prioritize, maybe pick programs, be creative with how you do things that's going to appeal to the family that you're working with.
It's matching, isn't it? Because there's not very often multiple routes to get towards a single outcome.
Yeah,
And the route that you pick will be dependent on the people coming on that journey with you.
exactly. Yeah, that's it exactly. And it's not to say, that you couldn't get the Couch Potato family onto bikes one day, but it might not be the most important thing to them, and it might not be the most important thing to the child involved.
Yeah.
So just say, be creative, talk to the family about what are their priorities, what's important to them, get to know them well, and how they are as a family. Um, Try and leave one space that's PBS free. I think this is a really important one. No matter what sort of size of accommodations the family is living in, make one space, whether it's a corner of a living room, a bedroom is usually a preferred place, like, the parents' bedroom. It's got to be PBS free. And again, the example I can give from my own experience is that certainly when we were teaching Connor to read, and to identify objects and things like that, we had little Velcro stickers on everything in the house. The TV, the washing machine, kitchen cupboards, the fridge, you name it. Everything had either a picture on it or a word on it, because he was actually quite good at recognizing words. And I always used to joke that, if you stood still long enough in my house, you would get a Velcro label stuck to you, because that's how how prevalent they were in the house. So, and if you think about that's fine. You're trying to work with the young person, you're trying to generalize. That's brilliant. But when it's the home that you're living in 24 hours a day, you need to have some kind of escape place where there isn't a Velcro sticker on the mirror or the wardrobe or the bed, and you could just escape from the circumstances. So I think that's really important. So just try and make sure there is that one space and you don't encroach into it.
Yeah.
Um, when we first started with Connor working with the home program, we did the workshop in the living room, but then we were fortunate enough to have a bedroom that we could convert into a room his programs, and that's how it started, and it was all very neat and tidy and all the resources were in that room. And then of course as he started to have more programs and more generalization, it creeps out of the room. So the bathroom, for example, we had a big piece of chipboard over the bath so we could use it as a like a painting area. When he was toilet training, of course we did a particular program that required a lot of time spent in the bathroom. So all the resources were in all the treats and toys and things like that, they were all in the bathroom as well. And then it starts coming down the stairs, and then you're in the living room and the kitchen and everywhere. So I can't much as all this was wonderful because it all demonstrated learning and so on, it's still in your face 24 hours a day. So leave a space. And on those same lines about resources, just something to bear in mind is about personal finances. It is very expensive having a child with a disability. I can tell you that from personal experience. So don't encourage spending unless it's absolutely necessary. Know what resources are available. There's often, if you're working with children, there's often toy libraries. Encourage things like, charity shopping and car boots and things like that for toys, and things like that. eBay, lots of places where you can get resources. And also, they don't necessarily need to buy them. Borrow them if you can, because you're not going to need a lot of these resources forever. You might just need them for a period of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, be aware of, you don't need to know the ins and outs of the family's financial circumstances, but don't assume that
There's
they
lots
can.
extra.
Yeah, there is a lot. So yeah, and again, encourage networking for support. So make sure that you are aware of what resources are out there for somebody to use, that you can advise on, and that they can contact other families and so on. You can share things, share resources and things like that. It is very valuable.